The morning sun cast long shadows across Earth's Space Academy as students hurried through its gleaming corridors. The Academy's usual buzz of activity had turned into an excited murmur when news spread about a special guest lecturer from the Galactic University. Professor Gray stood tall and imposing at the front of the lecture hall, his silvery skin reflecting the morning light that streamed through the large windows. His 4 eyes blinked in sequence as he observed the mixed class of human and alien students filing into the room. The professor had visited 37 different species across the galaxy, testing their problem-solving abilities through his famous challenges. Each time, he'd proven his point about the natural hierarchy of species intelligence. Today would be no different. The lecture hall fell silent as he raised all 4 of his arms. "I am Professor Gray," he announced, his universal translator giving his words a slight mechanical edge. "I have come to evaluate your species' capacity for advanced problem-solving." He paused, looking down at the humans with what could only be described as mild disdain. "Your acceptance into the Galactic University's exchange program was controversial." In the third row, Tom Miller shifted in his seat, trying to stay focused despite having stayed up late working on projects. The coffee in his reusable cup was still too hot to drink, but he welcomed its warm comfort. Around him, both human and alien students sat straighter, their attention completely captured by the famous professor. "Many of my colleagues believe that humanity's admission was premature," Professor Gray continued, moving across the stage with fluid grace. "Your species has barely mastered basic space travel. Your understanding of quantum mechanics is—" He paused, searching for a diplomatic word, "developing." Several of the alien students nodded in agreement. A blue-skinned student from the Centauri system didn't bother hiding his smirk. Tom noticed, but kept his face neutral, blowing on his coffee to cool it down. However, Professor Gray's voice grew louder. "The university board insists on giving every species a chance to prove themselves. That is why I am here." He touched a small device on his wrist, and a holographic display filled the air above the students' heads. Complex equations and diagrams rotated slowly, showing what appeared to be a communication device of some kind. "This is your challenge," he announced. "Design and create a working prototype of a quantum communication device capable of instantaneous data transfer across at least 1 light year." He let that sink in for a moment before adding, "You have 24 hours." The room erupted in whispers and gasps. Even the alien students looked shocked. The blue-skinned Centaurian's smirk vanished. Tom took his first sip of coffee, studying the rotating diagrams with interest. "Professor," called out one of the alien students, their crystalline body structure catching the light, "the standard time for this challenge is 3 weeks. 24 hours is impossible." Professor Gray's mouth stretched into what might have been a smile. "Impossible. Perhaps for some species. The great minds of the galaxy completed this task in various timeframes. The Centauri achieved it in 2 weeks. The Rigelians in 10 days. Even the highly advanced Arcturians required a full week." His 4 eyes swept across the room. "I am merely adjusting the timeframe to match humanity's claimed potential." The sarcasm in his voice was clear. This wasn't just a challenge. It was designed to be a humiliation. To prove once and for all that humans didn't belong in the galaxy's prestigious academic institutions. Tom took another sip of his coffee, his mind already working on the problem. The holographic display showed several standard quantum entanglement approaches. They were elegant, advanced, and, in Tom's opinion, needlessly complicated. "You will work individually," Professor Gray continued. "Each of you has been assigned a workspace in the laboratory wing. All standard materials are provided." He gestured, and new information appeared in the hologram, workspace assignments, and a list of available materials. "You may begin now. Remember, 24 hours." Students rushed out of the lecture hall, many already pulling out their computation devices. The alien students moved with particular urgency, their expressions intense. They knew what this challenge meant for their species' reputation. Tom remained in his seat, finishing his coffee. Professor Gray noticed and fixed all four eyes on him. "Is there a problem?" Human student. "No, sir," Tom replied politely. "Just finishing my coffee. Helps me think better." The professor's eyes blinked in sequence again. "Thinking will not be enough, young human. This challenge requires advanced understanding of quantum mechanics, subspace field theory, and practical engineering skills that your species has barely begun to grasp." Tom nodded, standing up and gathering his things. "You're probably right, sir. But we humans have a saying. Sometimes the best solutions are the simple ones." Professor Gray watched the human student leave, noting how unhurried his pace was. In his centuries of teaching, he had seen many species face his challenges. Some approached them with fear, others with arrogance. But this calm, this was new. Still, he had no doubt about the outcome. Humans were simply too primitive to solve such an advanced problem, especially in such a short time. In the laboratory wing, the scene was one of intense activity. Alien students had already begun complex calculations, their workspaces filling with holographic displays of quantum formulae and subspace field projections. The blue-skinned Centaurian was particularly focused, his six-fingered hands flying over multiple interfaces at once. Tom walked to his assigned workspace, set down his empty coffee cup, and looked at the materials available to him. There were standard quantum field generators, subspace resonators, and various other pieces of advanced technology. But what caught his eye were the simpler items: basic electronic components, wire, and what looked like an old-fashioned radio antenna. He sat down and pulled out a small notebook, actual paper, which drew curious looks from his alien classmates. While they worked with advanced holographic interfaces, Tom sketched with a simple pencil, occasionally pausing to think. Professor Gray walked through the laboratory, observing each student's progress. He nodded approvingly at the complex calculations appearing on screens and the sophisticated components being assembled. When he reached Tom's workspace, he found the human still sitting there, drawing in his notebook. "Mr. Miller," the professor said, not bothering to hide his disapproval, "you do realize this challenge requires actual construction, not just drawing." Tom looked up and smiled. "Yes, sir. Just working out some ideas first. Sometimes the old ways are the best ways to start." The professor's dismissive snort made his opinion of old ways clear. He moved on, already mentally composing the report he would write about humanity's failure. This would finally prove what he had been saying all along. Some species simply weren't ready for advanced galactic education. But Tom didn't seem bothered by the professor's dismissal. He continued working in his notebook, occasionally glancing at the available materials. While the alien students raced against time with their complex solutions, he seemed almost relaxed, as if the 24-hour deadline meant nothing to him. Little did Professor Gray know, but in just 15 more minutes, his entire understanding of human problem-solving capability would be completely upended. Tom Miller, the coffee-drinking human who preferred paper to holograms, was about to demonstrate why humanity had survived and thrived despite their technological limitations. Sometimes, being primitive meant thinking in ways that more advanced species had long forgotten. The laboratory buzzed with the sound of quantum field generators and the soft hum of holographic displays. 15 minutes had passed since Professor Gray's challenge began, and the alien students were deep into their work. The blue-skinned Centaurian had already filled 3 holographic screens with complex equations, while the crystalline student had begun assembling a delicate array of quantum resonators. Tom Miller finally put down his pencil and looked at his notebook with satisfaction. His simple sketches might have seemed primitive to the others, but they contained the seed of an idea that had been growing in his mind since he first saw the challenge. He stood up and began gathering materials from the supply station, drawing curious and slightly mocking glances from his alien classmates. "Look at what he's taking," whispered the Centaurian to a nearby student, not bothering to keep his voice down. "Basic radio components. He might as well try to build it with sticks and stones." Several alien students chuckled, their laughter carrying across the laboratory. Professor Gray, who had been observing from his position near the door, watched with growing certainty that his assessment of human capabilities had been correct. The human student wasn't even attempting to use the quantum field generators or subspace resonators, the basic building blocks of any proper quantum communication device. Tom returned to his workspace with an armful of what appeared to be junk to the advanced alien students: wire, basic electronic components, a simple radio antenna, and only one quantum field generator, the smallest one available. He began working with quick, sure movements, his hands steady as he assembled what looked like a crude radio transmitter. "Professor," called out the crystalline student, their voice filled with concern, "is it permitted to use such primitive technology in this challenge?" Professor Gray's 4 eyes blinked in sequence as he considered the question. The challenge parameters do not specify which technologies must be used, only that the end result must achieve quantum communication across 1 light year. His tone carried a hint of amusement. "Though I doubt ancient radio technology will prove useful in achieving that goal." Tom continued working, seemingly deaf to the conversations around him. His fingers moved with practiced ease, twisting wires and connecting components. Unlike his classmates' elegant holographic interfaces and pristine quantum arrays, his workspace looked more like an old Earth repair shop, with tools and components scattered about in what appeared to be random order. As the first hour passed, the alien students made significant progress. The Centaurian had moved from theoretical calculations to practical assembly, his 6-fingered hands dancing over sophisticated equipment. The crystalline student had created a beautiful array of quantum resonators that sparkled in the laboratory lights. Other alien students were similarly engaged in complex, advanced work. Professor Gray made his rounds, nodding approvingly at the advanced approaches being taken. When he reached Tom's workspace, he paused, his expression unreadable. The human student had created what looked like a hybrid device, part primitive radio, part quantum field manipulator. It was ugly by galactic standards, with exposed wires and visible connections rather than the sleek, enclosed designs preferred by advanced species. "Mr. Miller," Professor Gray said, unable to contain his curiosity, "what exactly are you attempting to create?" Tom looked up from his work, a small smile on his face. "Something simple, sir. I noticed that all the standard quantum communication designs use extremely complex systems to maintain quantum entanglement. But what if we don't need all that complexity? What if we could use basic radio principles to stabilize the quantum field instead?" The professor's 4 eyes widened slightly. That's not how quantum fields work. The complexity is necessary for maintaining coherence across light-year distances. You cannot simply broadcast quantum entanglement like a radio signal. "Maybe not directly," Tom agreed, connecting another wire to his device. "But what if we use the radio waves as a carrier? Something to help maintain the quantum field's stability without all the extra equipment, like training wheels on a bicycle." Several nearby alien students had stopped their work to listen, their expressions ranging from amusement to confusion. The idea seemed so absurd, so primitive, that it had to be a joke. Yet the human continued working with complete confidence. "Training wheels?" Professor Gray asked, unfamiliar with the term. "Small wheels attached to a bicycle to help beginners balance," Tom explained, not looking up from his work. "Sometimes you need something simple to help something complex work better." He connected the quantum field generator to his modified radio assembly, and a soft hum filled the air. The professor watched in bewilderment as the human student made final adjustments to his bizarre creation. It violated several principles of conventional quantum communication design. Yet, there was something about its simplicity that made him uneasy. In all his years of teaching, he had never seen an approach quite like this. 2 hours into the challenge, the laboratory had settled into a rhythm of focused work. The alien students continued their methodical progress through proven quantum communication theories, each step carefully calculated and precisely implemented. Their workspaces were models of advanced technological development, filled with sophisticated equipment and elegant solutions. Tom's workspace, in contrast, looked like something from a museum of early space-age technology. His device was a strange hybrid of old and new, with the small quantum field generator nestled among radio components, like a diamond in a pile of coal. He had begun fine-tuning the radio frequency, making tiny adjustments while watching the quantum field's behavior on a simple display screen. Interesting, he muttered to himself, drawing the attention of nearby students. The quantum field actually seems to like certain radio frequencies, almost like it's resonating with them. The Centaurian student couldn't contain himself any longer. That's impossible. Quantum fields don't interact with electromagnetic waves in that way. Every student knows this. Every student is taught this. Tom corrected gently, still focused on his adjustments. But has anyone ever actually tried it? Sometimes the things we think we know for certain turn out to be wrong. Professor Gray found himself drawn back to Tom's workspace, watching with growing fascination as the human student continued his unorthodox approach. The professor's centuries of experience told him this couldn't possibly work, yet something about the human's quiet confidence made him wonder if perhaps. But no, it was impossible. As the third hour began, Tom sat back in his chair and looked at his creation with satisfaction. The device hummed quietly, its exposed components a sharp contrast to the sleek designs at other workstations. The small quantum field generator pulsed with a steady rhythm, synchronized perfectly with the radio waves emanating from the modified antenna. "Mr. Miller," Professor Gray said, his voice carrying across the now quiet laboratory, "are you suggesting that you're ready to test your device?" After only 3 hours, Tom stood up, stretching his back. "Actually, sir, I think it's ready now. Would you like to see if it works?" The laboratory fell completely silent. Even the constant hum of quantum field generators seemed to pause. The alien students stared in disbelief at the human who dared to attempt the impossible, not just solving the 24-hour challenge in 3 hours, but doing so with technology that seemed better suited to a primitive planet's first steps into space. Professor Gray's 4 eyes blinked rapidly in sequence, a sign of intense surprise in his species. "You understand, Mr. Miller, that a failed demonstration will count against your final evaluation?" "Yes, sir," Tom replied, his calm confidence unchanged. "But sometimes you have to take a chance to prove that the impossible isn't as impossible as everyone thinks." The professor nodded slowly. "Very well. Proceed with your demonstration." He stepped back, preparing to document what he assumed would be a spectacular failure, one that would finally prove his point about humanity's readiness for advanced galactic education. Little did he know that the next few minutes would force him to question everything he thought he knew about technological advancement, species intelligence, and the true nature of innovation. The tension in the laboratory was thick enough to cut with a knife as Tom Miller prepared his strange device for testing. The alien students had abandoned their own work to watch, their expressions ranging from skeptical amusement to genuine curiosity. Professor Gray stood nearby, his 4 eyes fixed on the hybrid creation of primitive radio technology and advanced quantum components. "The testing station is ready," announced a laboratory technician, pointing to a quantum receiver positioned exactly 1 light-year away, connected to the lab through a stable wormhole viewing portal. The standard testing setup used by the Galactic University allowed immediate verification of quantum communication experiments. Tom nodded and made a few final adjustments to his device. The exposed wires and basic components made it look like something from a human garage workshop rather than a galactic research facility. The single quantum field generator hummed softly, its energy pulsing in perfect sync with the radio waves emanating from the modified antenna. "Before we begin," Professor Gray said, his voice carrying a hint of professional courtesy, "please explain your theoretical approach." "For the record," Tom smiled and pointed to his device. "Well, everyone knows quantum entanglement is delicate. The normal approach is to use lots of complex equipment to protect and maintain it. But I thought, what if we're making it too complicated? What if we could use simple radio waves to create a kind of protective bubble around the quantum field?" The blue-skinned Centaurian student couldn't suppress a laugh. A protective bubble. That's not even proper scientific terminology. Maybe not, Tom agreed good-naturedly. But sometimes the simplest explanations work best. Think of it like this. When you're carrying something fragile, you don't need an anti-gravity field. Sometimes just wrapping it in bubble wrap does the job better. Professor Gray's facial tentacles twitched in what might have been confusion. Bubble wrap? It's a simple packing material we use on Earth, Tom explained. The point is, complex problems don't always need complex solutions. I noticed that quantum fields naturally resonate with certain radio frequencies. Instead of fighting this interaction like conventional designs do, I decided to use it. The crystalline student raised a glittering appendage. But that goes against everything we know about quantum field stability. The textbooks clearly state. Textbooks, Tom interrupted gently, are written based on what we've already tried, not on what's possible. He turned to Professor Gray. Ready to test, sir? The professor nodded, his professional demeanor masking his certainty that this demonstration would end in failure. Proceed. Tom took a deep breath and powered up his device. The quantum field generator pulsed brighter, its energy dancing through the crude radio assembly in ways that made several alien students step back in alarm. The modified antenna began emitting a soft, rhythmic hum. First, we established the radio carrier wave, Tom narrated, adjusting a simple dial. The hum changed pitch slightly. Then we inject the quantum entangled particles into the field. He pressed a button, and the small quantum generator flared briefly. On the viewing portal, the receiver stationed 1 light-year away showed an immediate response. Professor Gray's eyes widened. The quantum field was maintaining coherence, something that should have been impossible with such a basic setup. Now for the actual data transmission, Tom said, picking up a simple input device. He typed a quick message. Hello from the simple solution. The laboratory held its collective breath. According to everything they knew about quantum physics, this shouldn't work. The crude radio components should have disrupted the quantum field. The lack of proper containment equipment should have caused the entanglement to collapse. The whole setup violated at least a dozen fundamental principles of quantum communication. Yet on the viewing portal, characters began appearing. Hello from the simple solution. The transmission was perfect, instantaneous, stable. Professor Gray's 4 eyes blinked rapidly in sequence. That's impossible. He rushed to check the testing equipment, looking for any sign of malfunction or trickery. The quantum field coherence readings they're better than standard equipment produces. The alien students crowded around the displays, their previous condescension replaced by bewilderment. The blue-skinned Centaurian was frantically comparing the results to known quantum communication theories on his holographic display, trying to understand how this contradicted everything he had learned. Tom continued typing messages, each one appearing instantly on the receiver a light-year away. The radio waves act like a support system, he explained as he worked. They provide a stable framework that actually helps maintain quantum coherence. All those complex containment systems in conventional designs. They might be doing more harm than good, like using a sledgehammer to hang a picture. But the energy requirements, the crystalline student began, are minimal, Tom finished. The radio carrier wave does most of the work, and it needs very little power. The quantum field generator barely has to work at all. It's like it's surfing on the radio waves. Professor Gray had moved from skepticism to intense scientific curiosity. Mr. Miller, are you suggesting that we've been approaching quantum communication from entirely the wrong direction? That simpler technology might actually be more effective. Not exactly wrong, Tom said diplomatically. Just maybe too focused on perfect theoretical solutions instead of practical ones. Sometimes you need to step back and look at the problem with fresh eyes. The professor picked up Tom's notebook, flipping through the simple sketches and basic calculations. This is remarkable. You developed this concept in 15 minutes. Tom shrugged. The basic idea, yes. Humans are good at that, thinking outside the box. We had to be. When you don't have advanced technology, you learn to work with what you have. Around the laboratory, the alien students had begun examining their own complex devices with new eyes. The Centaurian was already modifying his calculations, while the crystalline student had started dismantling their elaborate quantum array. You know, Tom continued, still sending test messages through his device, I bet we could make this even simpler. Maybe add some basic shielding to protect against interference, optimize the radio frequency selection. He trailed off, noticing the professor's intense stare. Sorry, am I talking too much? Professor Gray slowly shook his head. No, Mr. Miller. Please continue. I believe we all have a great deal to learn about. Simplicity. He turned to address the entire laboratory. Students, I suggest you pay close attention. It seems we have been given an invaluable lesson about the relationship between technological advancement and practical innovation. The alien students gathered around Tom's workspace, their earlier derision forgotten. Even the Centaurian student approached with a data pad, ready to take notes. The human student began explaining his design in detail, pointing out how each simple component contributed to the whole. As Tom talked, Professor Gray watched with growing amazement. In all his years of teaching, he had never seen anything quite like this. The human student hadn't just solved the challenge. He had demonstrated that sometimes the most advanced solution was the least complex one. The quantum communication device continued its steady operation, its crude appearance belying its revolutionary nature. In the corner of the laboratory, the professor's own sophisticated quantum array sat unused, its sleek design suddenly seeming needlessly complicated. The 24-hour challenge had been solved in less than 3 hours, not through advanced technology or complex theories, but through simple, practical thinking. And somewhere in the professor's mind, a new respect for human innovation began to grow. News of Tom's successful quantum communication device spread through Earth's Space Academy like wildfire. Within an hour, the laboratory had become crowded with curious observers, teachers, students, and even a few visiting alien diplomats who happened to be on campus. They all wanted to see the impossible device that combined primitive radio technology with quantum mechanics. Professor Gray had moved from initial shock to intense scientific curiosity. He circled Tom's workstation, making detailed scans of the device with his advanced sensors. The readings only deepened his amazement. The quantum field stability was unlike anything he had seen in his centuries of research. The frequency matching is perfect, he muttered, more to himself than the gathered crowd. The radio waves aren't just containing the quantum field. They're enhancing it. His facial tentacles twisted in what might have been excitement. Mr. Miller, would you mind demonstrating a more complex data transmission? Tom nodded and began typing on his simple interface. On the viewing portal, a stream of data appeared instantaneously at the receiver 1 light-year away. Text, numbers, and even simple images, all transmitted without any loss or delay. The crude-looking device handled it all with quiet efficiency. The blue-skinned Centaurian student, who had spent the last hour reviewing his quantum mechanics textbooks, finally spoke up. But this violates Zim's third law of quantum coherence. The field should collapse without proper containment. Maybe Zim's law needs updating, Tom suggested kindly. Laws of physics are absolute, but our understanding of them isn't. We're always learning new things. He adjusted a wire on his device. Actually, I think the radio waves are acting as a kind of natural containment field. It's like they're creating a path of least resistance for the quantum particles to follow. A visiting alien physicist pushed through the crowd, their gelatinous form quivering with academic excitement. Young human, are you suggesting that electromagnetic waves can guide quantum entanglement? This could revolutionize our understanding of particle physics. Professor Gray raised all 4 arms for silence. One question at a time, please. Mr. Miller, would you be willing to subject your device to a series of standard tests for proper scientific documentation? Tom agreed, and the next hour turned into an impromptu scientific conference. Teams of researchers ran every test they could think of on the hybrid device. They'd measured its power consumption, remarkably low, its quantum field stability, unprecedented, and its data transmission accuracy, perfect. With each test, the excitement in the laboratory grew. The crystalline student, who had completely abandoned their own complex device, watched in fascination as Tom explained the basic principles behind his design. "It's like you found a backdoor in quantum physics," they said, their crystalline structure glowing with interest. "A simple solution that we all missed because we were too focused on complex theories." "Not a backdoor," Tom corrected. "More like taking the scenic route. Sometimes when you step back and look at the bigger picture, you see connections that aren't obvious when you're focused on the details." Professor Gray had set up a direct link to the Galactic University's main research campus. Senior professors and quantum physics experts from across the galaxy were now watching the demonstrations through holographic projections. Their reactions ranged from skepticism to excitement to outright disbelief. "Impossible," declared one elderly alien professor, their holographic image flickering with agitation. "Quantum fields cannot be manipulated with such primitive technology." "Yet here we are," Professor Gray responded, gesturing to the working device. "Perhaps it is time we reconsidered what we think of as primitive." He turned to Tom. "Mr. Miller, would you explain your thought process to my colleagues?" Tom stood up, suddenly aware that he was addressing some of the galaxy's greatest scientific minds. But his voice remained steady as he explained his simple approach. "On Earth, we have a saying, 'Keep it simple, stupid.' It's a reminder that the best solution isn't always the most complicated one." He pointed to his device. Everyone was so focused on controlling and containing quantum fields that nobody thought to work with their natural properties. It's like trying to redirect a river by building a massive dam when you could just dig a new channel and let the water flow naturally. The alien professors murmured among themselves. One of them, a being composed entirely of swirling energy, spoke up. "But the calculations, the theoretical framework, how did you determine the correct radio frequencies?" "I didn't calculate them," Tom admitted. "I observed how the quantum field responded to different frequencies and adjusted until I found the right one. Sometimes hands-on experimentation works better than pure theory." This admission caused another stir among the professors. The idea of using trial and error instead of precise theoretical calculations seemed to challenge everything they believed about proper scientific methodology. Professor Gray, however, was nodding slowly. "Perhaps this is why humans have advanced so quickly despite their technological limitations. They are not bound by conventional thinking. They see possibilities where we see only established rules." The blue-skinned Centaurian, who had spent the last few hours trying to understand the principles behind Tom's device, suddenly straightened up. "I think I see it now. The radio waves aren't just carrying the quantum field. They're creating a kind of resonance pattern that stabilizes it naturally. It's so simple, but it's brilliant." Tom smiled. "Exactly. Sometimes the best way to solve a problem is to work with nature instead of trying to force it to do what we want." As the afternoon wore on, more tests were conducted, more data was collected, and more experts arrived to examine the device. Tom's simple creation had sparked what promised to be a major shift in quantum communication technology. Already, some of the alien students were sketching modifications to their own devices, incorporating elements of Tom's design. Professor Gray stood back, watching as the human student patiently explained his work to yet another group of fascinated researchers. The professor's initial prejudice about human capabilities had been completely overturned. These primitive beings had something valuable to teach the galaxy's most advanced civilizations: the power of simple, practical innovation. One of the alien diplomats approached the professor. "This changes things, doesn't it? The human approach to problem solving. It could be valuable in other fields as well." "Indeed," Professor Gray agreed. "Perhaps we have been too quick to dismiss species that take different approaches to technological advancement." He watched as Tom demonstrated another successful data transmission. Sometimes the greatest innovations come not from advancing existing technology, but from looking at problems in entirely new ways. The hybrid device continued its steady operation, its exposed wires and basic components, a sharp contrast to the advanced technology surrounding it. Yet none of the observers saw it as primitive anymore. Instead, they saw it as proof that innovation didn't always mean making things more complex. Sometimes it meant finding the simple solution that everyone else had overlooked. The sun was setting over Earth's Space Academy, casting long shadows through the laboratory windows. Most of the excited crowd had dispersed, leaving behind a smaller group of serious researchers still studying Tom's quantum communication device. The simple hybrid of radio technology and quantum mechanics had sparked what many were already calling a revolution in galactic communications. Professor Gray sat in a quiet corner, composing his official report to the Galactic University Board. His 4 eyes blinked thoughtfully as he searched for the right words to describe what had happened today. How could he explain that a human student, using technology that the galaxy had long dismissed as primitive, had not only solved his challenge, but had completely transformed their understanding of quantum physics? Tom was still at his workstation, but now he was helping other students modify their own devices. The blue-skinned Centaurian had already stripped down his complex quantum array and was rebuilding it with Tom's simpler approach. The crystalline student was excitedly testing different radio frequencies, discovering new ways that electromagnetic waves could stabilize quantum fields. "Mr. Miller," Professor Gray called, setting aside his report. "A moment of your time, please." Tom walked over, looking tired but satisfied. The professor gestured to a chair, and they sat facing each other. For a long moment, the alien academic studied the human student who had appended centuries of established theory. "I owe you an apology," Professor Gray finally said. "I came here expecting to prove that humans were not ready for advanced galactic education. Instead, you have proven that perhaps it is we who need to learn from humans." Tom shook his head modestly. "There's no need for an apology, Professor. Every species has something to teach and something to learn. That's what makes the galaxy interesting." Indeed, the professor's facial tentacles moved in what had become a gesture of respect. "Tell me, how did humans develop this ability to think differently, to see simple solutions where others see only complexity?" Tom thought for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "I think it's because we had to. Earth's history is full of times when we didn't have the best tools or the most advanced technology. We had to make do with what we had, find ways to solve problems with limited resources. Necessity breeding innovation," the professor mused. "Yes, I see it now. While other species focused on advancing their technology, humans learned to innovate with what they had available." He gestured to the hybrid device, like using simple radio waves to stabilize quantum fields, an elegant solution that we overlooked because we were too focused on developing more complex containment systems. A group of alien researchers approached, carrying data pads filled with test results. One of them, a tall being with iridescent scales, spoke excitedly. "Professor Gray, the efficiency readings are remarkable. The human design uses less than 10% of the power required by conventional quantum communication systems, yet achieves better results. And it's cheaper to build," added another researcher, their multiple appendages waving enthusiastically. "No rare materials needed, no complex manufacturing processes. This could make quantum communication accessible to developing worlds across the galaxy." Professor Gray nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Mr. Miller, would you be willing to share your design with the Galactic University? This could help countless species advance their communication technologies." "Of course," Tom agreed immediately. "Knowledge should be shared. Maybe other species will find ways to improve it even further." The professor's eyes crinkled in what might have been a smile. "Already thinking of collaboration? You continue to surprise me. Many inventors would try to protect such a revolutionary discovery." Tom shrugged. "The best innovations happen when people work together. Besides, it's not really my discovery. I just noticed something that was already there, waiting to be found. Anyone could have seen it if they looked at the problem differently. The laboratory had grown quiet as the sun disappeared below the horizon. Most of the other students had left, their own devices either abandoned or rebuilt following Tom's principles. The blue-skinned Centaurian approached their workstation, proudly displaying a simplified version of the quantum communicator. "It works," they announced, their previous condescension replaced by genuine enthusiasm. "I removed all the complex containment systems and used a basic radio wave modulator instead. The quantum field stability is even better than before." Professor Gray stood up, his tall frame casting a long shadow in the evening light. "Mr. Miller, I came here to evaluate humanity's readiness for advanced galactic education. I believe I can now submit my report with complete confidence." He picked up his data pad and began reading aloud. "The human approach to problem solving, while unconventional by galactic standards, demonstrates a remarkable ability to innovate and find elegant solutions to complex challenges. Their tendency to question established theories and explore simple alternatives may well revolutionize many fields of galactic science." The professor paused, looking at Tom. "I am recommending not only full acceptance of human students into all galactic university programs, but also the establishment of a new research division focused on studying and applying human problem-solving methodologies." Tom blinked in surprise. "A whole research division, just for human thinking methods?" "Indeed," Professor Gray confirmed. "Your solution to the quantum communication challenge is just the beginning. I believe there are many other fields that could benefit from the human perspective. Sometimes, it takes a fresh view to see past our own technological limitations." The remaining alien researchers gathered around, their various forms of expression all showing agreement. The crystalline student's surface sparkled with excitement as they spoke. "Just think of the possibilities. If simple radio waves can stabilize quantum fields, what other basic principles have we been overlooking?" "This is why the galaxy needs diversity," Tom said quietly. "Different species, different ways of thinking, different approaches to problems. We all have something to contribute." Professor Gray placed a gentle hand on Tom's shoulder, a gesture he had learned humans use to show approval. "Well said, Mr. Miller. I believe this day will be remembered as a turning point in galactic science, not because of the technology you created, but because you showed us that sometimes the best way forward is to step back and think simply." As the last light faded from the laboratory windows, Tom's hybrid device continued its steady operation, sending quantum communications across light years with quiet efficiency. Its exposed wires and basic components no longer looked primitive to anyone watching. Instead, they saw it as a symbol of something powerful. The idea that innovation doesn't always mean making things more complex, but sometimes means finding the simple solution that everyone else had overlooked. "I have one last question," Professor Gray said as they prepared to leave the laboratory. "You solved a 24-hour challenge in less than 3 hours. What would you have done with the remaining time?" Tom smiled. "Probably gotten more coffee and worked on making it even simpler. After all, the best solution is usually the one that any species can understand and use." The professor's 4 eyes blinked in sequence one last time. "A worthy goal indeed, Mr. Miller. A worthy goal indeed."